imagine giving away tens of millions of dollars? Could you imagine getting paid to give away tens of millions of dollars? That probably sounds like a dream job for many people, and it was for Dan Koval. And that is until one day when he decided to do the unimaginable, and he left. Now, instead of giving away money, Dan's new role puts him across the table where now he's the one asking for money. In episode 21, Dan and I talk about the power of developing relationships, how being a lifelong learner can literally take you anywhere in the world, and the value of showing up every day and giving your best. Now, as always, I want to thank you for your support by listening and sharing this podcast with others. Let's get into the conversation. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Confidence Covered by Humility podcast. I'm your host, James Mayhew. And on this podcast, we talk about what it takes to lead a company, a small business, a team, or even your home with humble confidence. And as you know, oftentimes I have a guest. Every month we have a guest on. And today I have a really fascinating guy. I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation we're going to have. I know I am. Dan has got a great sense of humor. He doesn't take himself seriously. And I just love what he's about. And so I want to introduce Dan Koval to you. Dan is I love this bio. And Dan, you know, feel free to jump in here. but here's the bio. He wrote, 2-time college dropout, educated in the school of life. When seeking my own way, I was lost. When I finally asked God for help, God met me where I was. Love that. I think that's great. Dirt and grass, dog bites, data entry, discovering the world. I have literally done it all. But now it's my time to give back and make a difference. I left the corporate world for an opportunity to impact my community through nonprofit leadership. And boy, do I have some stories to share. Dan, that is the best bio. I just love it. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it. I was trying to figure out at first, like, can I find my old corporate-y bio? Because again, I was in corporate America for 16 years. I went from driving a truck at UPS, slinging boxes, to working in a corporate environment for the first time. I literally had never seen a cubicle before in my life, and then all of a sudden I was working in one. And so it was a huge transition. And then I have this really nice couple paragraph corporate bio, and I was like, no, that's not me anymore. I'm not that person anymore. And so I needed to do something. So I kind of wrote that off the cuff for you yesterday or whatever. And I was like, this is fun. This is probably who I am. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's what, and you know, when I read it, that's the funny thing is you have a great presence on LinkedIn, and we've been connected for probably, I don't know, maybe a year, maybe a little less than that. It's kind of hard to tell. But what I love about your bio is it seems really authentic to what I see you post about. And you do a lot of humorous stuff. A lot of your posts you do a lot of video, and it's always got this little hook. And you are kind of a master at pulling people in with this intriguing hook or this intriguing line. And I just love it. I think it's real authentic to who you are.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm definitely a showman by experience. The youngest of 3 kids. And so growing up in the public school system, right, you kind of had 2 choices. You were either a nerd or a clown. And sure. I didn't like to study. So you could tell which way my personality went was to being the class clown. And it just by the sheer nature of being the youngest kid and having to fight for attention at home, I have 2 boys. And so my older one is the one that follows all the rules, and the younger one is the one that tries to break all the rules. And I'm like, sure. I can only imagine if we had a third, what that would be like. And I'm like, I'm glad we stopped when we did. But yeah, that's just who I've become. And so I like attention. I definitely, it feeds my pride and ego, which I need to be mindful of very, very often. Sure. And I have to remember the humility that I need to walk in. And so it's riding that fine line between what is effective to genuinely capture someone's attention to be able to tell them something impactful, as opposed to making myself just look good for the sake of looking good.
You recently went through a job change. Tell us a little bit about the job that you held and what you're doing now and how those 2 things are different. And then we'll get into the content here.
Sure. So I worked for a engineering software company, Bentley Systems, for 16 years. I came in as a data entry temp. worked through, did some technical support for a few years, did some internal IT work. Through that, was highly involved in volunteering through their outreach in the community, and was handed the responsibility of managing all their corporate giving around the globe. And so for the last 7 years, that's what I did. I managed multiple millions of dollars, giving away to over 400 organizations annually, funding things from local preschools having science lab kits to large universities endowed professorships. And so the whole gauntlet of a couple $100 here to $1 million there sorts of things. And so like you said in my bio, I've been on almost every continent, which I guess I've now done a lot of my international travel, but just having the ability to impact entire countries throughout my career, and then just feeling like God kind of said, "You're done here," and there's some interesting stories around that, and just kind of transitioned me into the 180-degree reverse, where now I'm the director of development for a local nonprofit, not small in terms. I mean, we have a couple hundred clients we serve on a daily basis, and folks that we're genuinely making an impact in the community. But now it's my job to ask other people for money, which is interesting because I know the wrong ways to do it.
Sure.
I'm just not quite sure yet of what the right ways are of doing it yet either. So, because I've had my fair share of bad appeals, and so I know how not to do it. It's just a matter of figuring out how to genuinely engage with someone and find out what it is they're looking to do and achieve with their investment, and how we could be the right fit. We could be the wrong fit, but we could be the right fit too.
Wow. So again, just kind of reflecting on what you were saying, you, to me, sound like you had one of the most interesting or unique / amazing kind of jobs there, where your job is to go literally give away millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Was that difficult?
It wasn't because, well, it was because it wasn't my money.
Sure.
And there is a lot of ease and opportunity to give someone else's money away very haphazardly. Oh, this is fun. This is cute. This is interesting. I'm just going to throw money at this problem and solve it, right? Because it's not my money. But it was, so being able to make sure I was stewarding their finances well and treating it in that way, and then because the company had done it for so long, right? The company's been around for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years, I think, next year. So that's their mantra. The founders, the family, the brothers that started the company, they always gave back. And so I walked into a framework, though it wasn't written down, it still was there, of different avenues and channels in which they were like, we fund these things intentionally. And so it was just kind of like working people through a flow chart. My answer was never no, it was not yet or not here. And so it's matching people to the right part of the pie of funds that we had to allocate, and just trying to figure out like, okay, you're interested in XYZ organization. Okay, that doesn't fit here, but doesn't fit there. And so being able to kind of help Sherpa people through that process of saying, okay, like I can't meet you in this location, but if you can get over here, I can meet you here. And so it was easy because there was the framework in place.
It sounds a little bit like almost some of the things that I've learned about with sales. I mean, what you were just describing there sounds like a little bit of negotiation even.
Yeah. And I think it was really interesting for me to be able to approach it from that side, because so being on the funding side of the table, my experience with other funders is they just had a checklist, and they had, like, it was very like, this is my money. You need to like come and appease me and make me want to give you the money.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I saw it as, this is a great opportunity. It's my responsibility to make sure all of this money clears out of the bank account by the end of the year, and so that we can re-up it for next year. And then how can I find the right folks to give this money to? Where can I make the biggest impact with that money? And I was always on the look, like who needs this money? Who can benefit from this money? Where can we get the best return on our investment? Not because we want to look good, but because we want our money to work as effectively as possible. And so I was able to kind of take a different approach, I think, than most folks, because again, the framework was there. It was just, I was responsible for stewarding it well.
Okay, so I got to ask. It sounds like a ton of responsibility to give away other people's money. And the thing I'm just sitting here going, did you screw it up once or twice? Did you do something where you kind of felt like a little reprimand?
I mean, I wasn't just completely off to myself to do whatever I wanted. There were certain, I mean, again, walking into something that had been around for over 30 years, the first thing I was told my first day was, hey, here is this list of relationships we have. Don't screw them up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're organizations that the company's been investing in for decades, literal decades. And so it's like, hey, don't break that one. Right. Go make sure that one continues. There was one time where I fat fingered a bank account number, and we accidentally put $60,000 in the wrong account. And weirdly enough, the owner of the wrong account never said anything about it. But we did get the money back. We got to put it in the right account eventually.
Sure.
But most of the mistakes were around that, just like where the money actually wound up, or if it wasn't in the right place. Not so much that there was ever really a situation where I said, hey, I want to give to this organization, or I want to fund this organization. And then like the executives find out and they're like, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Because one of the overarching principles of the organization was they give money where their employees, or they call them colleagues, where their colleagues serve. And so the understanding was, if there's someone there serving at a leadership level, then go give them money. You know, the amount always changed, but as long as there was that relationship, I was safe to give to that. And so it was really easy. I mean, there was a bunch of people doing a lot of great stuff all around the globe. So it's easy to find lots of places to put money when you've got 5,000 coworkers that are all doing really great stuff. So,
well, it just seems like such a fascinating, thought. I can't say that I have a client. I do have experience around some philanthropy, but not at that kind of level, not where you're just literally saying, hey, I'm going to give you a budget. It's got a bunch of zeros behind it. Go give it away, empty it out by the end of the year. It's intriguing to me. And so now if we could kind of talk about, and we just talked briefly prior to hitting record today, what's been the transition like to now asking for money? I know you mentioned it at the beginning here. You're not exactly sure what's the right thing. You know what some of the wrong appeals are, but how has that helped you? I guess you're brand new at this, but how is it going to help you going forward?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things, I'm going to take a half a step back. One of the things that I think that a lot of organizations do incorrectly or do short-sighted, maybe that's probably the better way of stating it, when they think about giving. They think about giving from the marketing side as opposed to the impact side. And I think when you find those relationships where your mission really aligns with what that organization is doing. So whether you're a local pizza shop and you want to give to a local soccer club, that makes sense, right? There's the commonality of the locale. Or you're a large car manufacturer giving back to high school driver ed programs or safe driving practices or Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? You find that thread where you develop the relationships that it makes an exponential impact when you two work together. And so Bentley did a really good job of doing that, is finding those organizations, not just because it's where people serve, but because of what they did and who they were, where they were intentional with their investment. I feel like a lot of companies give for the sake of giving to almost greenwash a problem, right? We want to look good. We want to save some money on our taxes. They're, US based, and we want to be able to tell people we did something good. Right. And so I think for me now, knowing that there are organizations out in the world that want to participate in the community, it's a matter of finding those ones that see the value we bring, see the opportunities our clients can have, and being able to marry those two things together, right? Like when I suckered my wife into dating me back when we were high school teens, I wasn't trying to date 25 girls at the same time. I honed in and said, hey, I think you're special. I really like you, and we developed a relationship. In that same way, I'm going to try to find those companies a large multinational engineering software company is probably not the one that would come to the top of my list. However, Bentley Systems is the reason I'm here, is because they do give, because they have participated personally in this organization and its mission, right? And so it's finding those connections, developing those relationships, just like sales, like you said. But it's the beauty is I get to use heartstrings to develop that relationship, right? Like I have a secret sauce. It's, your product might be great, your software may save time, your AI might be cutting edge, and that's awesome until the next one comes along. There's not that there's nobody else doing what we do, but the guy Jackie that works down in one workshop, there's only one Jackie. And so being able to share Jackie's story and the way that he recently saved us a ton of trouble because he was on quality control and he stopped a whole pallet full of products from going out the door being mislabeled, saved us a ton of time and money. And we're like, hey, let me tell you Jackie's story. Let me tell you about the amazing human being that Jackie is and what difference he makes on a daily basis. Nobody else has Jackie's story. I only have Jackie's story. So I get to find those organizations that want to hear about Jackie, that want to invest in Jackie, and want to be able to support folks like Jackie in developing them through job skill training and development.
Stories and storytelling, and I know you're a fan of Matt Zahn and his storytelling workshops, etc. I think I heard you on his podcast. Even is that true?
Yeah. I love his perspective because I don't understand why people don't tell more stories, and the way that he lays it out and the way that he describes it has just been. I've been a witness to his workshops and seeing these like really smart, successful executives almost get humbled by the fact that they're like, oh, we're throwing data and we got flashy marketing and it's amazing. And you're like, yeah, but a story, right? And so, I'm a huge proponent. I love what he's doing. I love to ride around his coattails sometimes and just kind of hang out with him and just watch him do his thing, because seeing the light bulb come on for people is just like, they're like, oh, that's how it works.
You sit through the stories and you listen, but a lot of times they're not happy stories. They're from sources of pain and stress and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's the struggle that kind of unifies. I think one of a quote that kind of came out in the pandemic, maybe it came from before, but it's like adversity begets ingenuity.
Ooh,
right? It's we don't create things when there isn't an opportunity to overcome something. We love to cheer for the underdog. We love to hear the janitor to CEO success story, right? Which is way less prevalent these days because most places don't have janitors, and most people don't stay at a company long enough to go through that. But even like the unicorn startup companies that are like a couple of folks are in a basement or a garage, right, and start something up, and then boom, they're Bill Gates or they're Jeff Bezos or whatever. Like we love those stories. We don't want to be in the story and have to struggle and suffer through the time that it takes, but we love to hear those stories and have them, encapsulated in a 2-hour, Hallmark movie and just get it done,
Right. Hey everyone, this is James, and I want to let you know that I recently launched a free email course called the 5-Day Founder Bootcamp for creating a thriving corporate culture. Now, I know that it can be stressful, maybe even frustrating at times, trying to get everyone on your team working together to achieve your goals and objectives. Perhaps it's not that you're frustrated, but maybe you're just looking for a better way to reignite that spark in your high performers. Whatever unique challenge that you're facing, well, I designed the Thriving Culture Guide, keeping you in mind. Now, think of this like attending a virtual boot camp, but here's the best part. You don't even have to leave your inbox. Each day contains some of my absolute best tactics and strategies to help you win at a game that your competition doesn't even know is being played. For example, the topic for day 3 addresses a topic that I get a lot of questions about. Like, James, how do we communicate and implement change through our culture? So you might be thinking, what if I'm not a founder? Is this still for me? Well, it is. And I just say it this way. If you're a conscientious leader who wants to improve the performance of your team, well, this guide was designed for you as well. Now, here's one of my favorite parts about this 5-day course. You don't have to wait for days 2, 3, or 4 to show up in your inbox. Nope, this email bootcamp was built to go at the pace that you want. So instead of patiently waiting, or maybe impatiently waiting for the next value pack lesson, you can click right on through and get it all at once. Go to thrivingcultureguide.com right now and get exclusive access today. You posted recently 3 life lessons, the top 3 things that took me from data entry to managing a corporation's charitable giving. And you started to list them out and you wrote a really cool post about this. And it was that post that day. I was like, I've been wanting to ask Dan to come on this podcast. This is the reason I'm going to do it. And so the first thing that you talked about was work ethic, Dan. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about that from this life lesson and this work ethic?
Yeah. So again, when I started at Bentley 17 years ago now at this point, as a data entry temp, I was driving a truck for UPS. I got bit by a golden retriever. I know no one believes me when I tell them it's a golden retriever. Like, they're the nicest dogs. I assure you, this one was not. A buddy of mine was working at a staffing company. He was like, hey, this company's hiring temps. Do you want to try this out? And I said, desks sound safer than dogs. So I showed up the first day, full suit, thinking, oh, it's a tech company, right? You got to be all fancy. And so I showed up, and there was like 30 or 40 of us on this Monday. We're wheeled into a meeting room. We're told what's going to happen and what we're going to learn and what we're going to do. I'd never done data entry. Again, I'd never seen a cubicle before in my life. And I was like, just give me the work. Like, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, right? You want me to scrub toilets? You want me to go drive somebody somewhere? I'm indifferent, right? I'm no better than anyone else. And so they're like, hey, here's the process, doc, for doing this data entry. They were changing internal IT systems is what it was, and it created a backlog of data. And so we all show up on Monday. Again, there's like 30 or 40 of us. By Friday, there's 3 or 4 of us left. Now, we had 12 packets of paper. Like, there was 12 scenarios. That's it, right? And if it was scenario 1, you just went through the steps and you just did the thing. So the following Monday, they brought in 30 or 40 more people. Just follow the process. And by Friday, there was only 2 or 3 of those folks left again. So this, for weeks, this would happen. Monday, a new pack of people would show up. By Friday, almost no one would be left. So all of a sudden, like, there was like this cohort of like 12 or 15 of us that had been there from the beginning. We're like, we're guessing who's going to make it, who's not going to make it, who's going to make it through the meat grinder of this thing. And I was just like, hey, just whatever you've got, just tell me what to do. If you're going to pay me for my time, I'll work for you and do whatever we're doing. And we did it. And so it was at the end of almost like 6 months of that, where we were coming to the end of, like, the work was just slowing down drastically. And they said, hey, how would you like a full-time job? And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of nice. And they're like, we'll give you benefits. Now, remember, this is also 2007, right? So this is like in an area where benefits were like, they were a benefit. It was actually nice to have. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'm recently married. We just moved out to the area. This sounds like a great thing. And they said, awesome. Here is the instruction manual for one of our pieces of software. It was about a 300-page book, about this thick. They said, if you can teach yourself the software in 1 week, you can have a job.
Okay.
So a week later, I find myself answering live phone calls from actual engineers who are like college graduates and fully certified and licensed, and they're asking me questions on how to use this software.
Wow. Okay.
And so just opportunities kept coming up like that, where I would just continue working and they would just give you more stuff, right? No good deed goes unpunished, but also like no hard worker goes unseen, because just things just kept coming, and they would, here's a new thing, here's a new thing, here's a new thing. I just kept going, right? I would just assumed that, I don't know, that's what you're supposed to do, and would slowly kind of move my way through the ranks a little bit there. And just one of the most striking things that hit me, I was probably about 5, maybe 6 years in. There was 2 different guys. There was one guy who his skill set wasn't really that good. He just wasn't grasping the concepts. And there's another guy who was an engineer and came in and was helping out, but he didn't show up to work. He'd call out like a couple of days a week. And that type of a person kept coming through the group, right, of tech support. But the guy that kept showing up every day, he kept getting they kept keeping him, but the folks that would kind of slack off, they kept getting rid of them. Those
Sure.
people kept getting weeded out. And I was like, he's just showing up. I mean, he's responsible, he's, attentive, he's, when we ask him to do things, he does it, he helps out where he can. Like, again, like he just wasn't retaining the information, but he was there, he was consistent. And I was like, man, there's something to this, like just showing up thing. And it kind of went back to like the work ethic quality. It's like, listen, if you just show up willing to work, whatever they ask you to do, then do it. I mean, obviously, don't do anything immoral or something that goes against your own personal values.
Sure.
But it was like just show up and do a good job, like as the bare minimum. And I didn't understand why other people wouldn't want to do that. And so I think that's what propelled me, because people start to recognize that you're willing to do things, you're willing to take on extra tasks, you're willing to take on extra responsibility, and you do it well. They're willing to trust you more.
Dan, don't you think though that was something that you always had?
I mean,
did you notice it early and it was just untapped, or was it something you knew that you'd always had?
I think before I was at UPS, I did landscaping with a small business in Philadelphia.
That's hard work.
That's hard work. I found myself, side thing about me, I don't like games. I don't like board games. I don't like card games. I genuinely don't like to compete against other people.
Sure.
I don't find it rewarding for me to beat you at something. I'm pretty good at most things too. Like in that, like math comes easy, those sorts of things. And so like it becomes less fun for me when I beat other people. So I found early on to compete against myself. So whether it was cutting grass, and I would do the weed whacking, and I would time myself. How fast can I do this house? How fast do I think I could do this? When I was delivering packages for UPS, how many stops can I do in an hour? And then when I got to doing the data entry, how many things can I process in an hour? And so like I just wound up competing against myself. And since I wasn't paying attention to what anyone else was doing, it comes out looking a lot like work ethic. Is that this natural competition with myself, because I'm not putting you down, I'm not putting you up, I'm not putting me down, not putting me up. I've got this internal desire to want to do better than I did before. And I think that's where that kind of came from.
Thank you for explaining that, because I hadn't really ever heard it explained that way. I think a lot of people just say, I've been a hard worker or whatever, or my parents instilled that value in me or whatever it is. But from that perspective of competing against yourself, I think there's something really kind of cool about that, which is if you're competing against others, that's where you can really slip into pridefulness, that ego, the arrogance, and I'm better than you. And that can really start to manifest in a bad way. I was growing up always a big fan of college basketball, still am. Jimmy Valvano was the NC State coach that won the national title, and I think it was in 83, maybe 84, but I'm pretty sure 83. But he gave this remarkable speech. He's mostly known for his SB speech, where he was near the end of his life dealing with cancer. But before that, like in 84 or 5, he was given a speech and he talked about work ethic. And he said, I don't try to outwork everyone else. He said, I'm just going to show up and work as hard as everyone else. And I thought, man, that was kind of profound. And it's a lot of pressure if you're always trying to outwork others. And again, not necessarily a healthy spot there. And I think that's kind of similar to what you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, there definitely were times where, especially in tech support, right, we were responsible for closing so many service tickets a day or whatever. Yeah. And there was one year where, in a very unhumble way, I blew the doors off of everyone else. And I was like, I walked around like I was the cock of the walk sort of thing, right? I thought I was the man.
Yeah.
And nobody cared. Like nobody cared. And I got so deflated because I was like, I'd attached my identity to this thing that didn't really matter. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll just beat my own record next month then. Like I just decided just to compete against myself, because it was easier, and it was more rewarding for me to know that I was doing what I needed to do, and I was carrying my own load, and just I wasn't trying to put anyone else down anymore.
Attached my identity.
Yeah.
Right. So again, I know you're open about your faith. I'm
Yeah.
open about my faith. What's been your biggest growth moment in your identity?
So one of the things in the last role that I held, right? So again, it's weird for me to talk about because it's funny. I never realized how little I talked about what I actually did in the specifics to even my wife or my friends. Because when I left, they were like, "Well, you don't do anything." Right? Because I played it off like it was a very comfortable job. It had a lot of flexibility, and I was very, very thankful for it. Like I can't explain the blessing that it has been for my family for the past couple of years. And so, but there was like maybe somewhere around like year like 2 or 3. Again, I gave away millions of dollars in my career, and for lack of a better term, like the amount of money that I was giving away could solve anybody's problem at any one time. But I was still just the dude that had to run to Wegmans to get my kid medicine at 9 o'clock at night. Wegmans is a grocery store around us. Sorry. I had to run to the store and get my kid medicine at 9 o'clock because my wife had to stay home with the other kid, like with both kids. You know what I mean? Like, and so like there was this act of like this realization of what I do professionally doesn't carry any weight day to day. And so whether it's helping somebody change a flat tire on the side of the road, it's scrubbing toilets in my own house, it's cutting the grass, it's helping a friend move, like eventually I realized that, it's not my money. They're not my guidelines. I can't take it with me in terms of like I couldn't like go out into the community and just be like, hey, here's $10,000. Go do whatever you want to do. And so it was this process that God had in my heart where I started to think that I was important, but realizing like the things that I was trying to attach myself to that were important were not things I had any control or any responsibility for, right? Like I would never, not once did I ever sell a single product. I was never responsible for any revenue coming into the company. I was always an expense, right? And tech support, you were an expense. You know what I mean? Like you were a necessary evil a lot of times, and you were treated that way too. And so, and there's nothing I've ever done in my career where I helped the bottom line of the company. And so having to finally realize like I'm a steward of this money. It's not mine. At the end of the day, if I made a mistake, I'm responsible for the outcome, but I don't get the the rah-rah pomp and circumstance because I just said yes or no. And so it did take a little while for God to do that work in my heart and help me to recognize, because like I would walk around in the grocery store thinking that I was more important than some of the other people, not knowing their stories, just making assumptions based on how they looked. But more times than not, I'd show up at the grocery store in sweatpants, and so like you wouldn't know that I was managing millions of dollars by the look of me, by the Toyota Corolla that I drive, like. You see the fancy salespeople come in and they're driving their really nice, German cars, and you're like, oh, they must be successful because they spend a lot of money on a car. I'm like, my car goes from A to B as well. It gets me where I need to go. And so being able to recognize that the skills that I have came because of the situations and the circumstances I've been involved in. Some of it because I am the son of my father and mother, some of their like the inherent genetics of who I am and what I do, but a lot of it because of the adversities I'd been through, right? Growing up in a public school, being overweight and being able to transition the teasing and taunting into being the class clown, being able to, turn it from they're laughing at me to now they're laughing with me, to liking to perform, to liking to work hard, to deciding that it's a lot easier to compete with myself than someone else. And it's much more satisfying as well because I didn't like the feeling of someone else losing. my niece, who she's now 23, as a child, she'd play tic-tac-toe with you, and she would intentionally lose. Like, there is something in our family where we don't like other people to lose. I don't like, it's not something we've ever talked about. It's not something we've ever, it's like, it's in our genetics
Interesting.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And she would intentionally, like, at 4, she would intentionally lose tic-tac-toe with you. And I'm like, this kid's weird. I mean, she's awesome, but she is still weird. And so just, it's some of those things that kind of came together, and it was like, and if at any day, and I've said it multiple times, if at any day one of the executives came and they're like, hey, you know what, we're done. You're done here. I was like, great, awesome, thanks. Like, they paid me every penny they ever said they would. They never, like, there was never a question if the money was going to show up. It was never a question if they were never going to ask me to do anything immoral. They were never going to ask me to do anything against my values. It was just a lot of integrity at the company. And so it was like, okay, it's my responsibility to make sure I have my focus in the right direction, because there's this agreement, right? They're giving me a place to go and to work. They're going to pay me a certain amount of money, and what they ask me to do, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to get it done as best as I can, because that's the agreement we came to, right? It didn't say on my paper that I was going to slack off, that I was going to scroll YouTube all day, that I was, I'll be paid for 8 hours, but yeah, I can just put in 3 hours worth of work and that'd be okay.
Right.
Right. That wasn't the agreement. That's literally not the paper I signed.
Yeah.
So I just figured I should just show up and work. And when I showed up and worked, it caught the attention of lots of other people, because they found out that I knew what I was doing, or I knew who else to ask the question. Towards the end of my career, it was almost every week someone would reach out and say, hey, I know it's not you, but do you know who ... Right? Like, after 15, 16 years at a company, you kind of know a lot of people, and you kind of know who knows what they need to know. And so just very quickly, new folks would gravitate to me and be like, hey, can you tell me how I find out this? Because also at a big company, it's hard to find information sometimes.
How big of a company? Just give me a sense of, like, how many employees are there?
5,000 globally.
Oh, wow.
It was over $1 billion in sales when I left. It's a great, tremendous company. Yeah.
Well, we're talking today here with Dan Koval, and Dan, we're in the middle of talking about 3 life lessons that you had. We just kind of covered work ethic, but we talked about identity and just all sorts of really good things. The second thing that you had mentioned in your post was this willingness to learn. And you mentioned that you're a college dropout of twice, you say. I'm just curious on that part there before we get into it. What was it about college that wasn't right for you? Because I can very much relate to this. I am a college dropout myself.
Yeah. I never liked school in general. It never felt challenging enough because I was stuck at the pace of everyone else.
Yep.
And so, like, that then made me feel like I was winning and they were losing. I think a lot of this stuff kind of winds up tying together when I think about it holistically. Right? Like, math came like absurdly easy to me. I will say I single-handedly carried 2 or 3 friends through high school algebra, because we had graphing calculators and you could put answers in the calculators, and I'd make sure they got like 85s on their tests. Like, they would just write whatever answer I wrote, and I'd get a 99, they'd get an 85. But I love to learn. I love trivia. I love facts. I love new things. I think it's great to just, like, there's so much I don't know, but there's so much I want to know. And I guess my understanding is that if you know something, James, right? If you figured out how to do, whether it's you figured out how to write a book, you figured out how to build a shelf, you figured out how to drive a car, you figured out how to do whatever, like, I just assume I could probably figure it out too, or I could follow the steps that you did to figure it out as well.
Yeah.
And so back when they handed me that book, the manual to the piece of software, I didn't look at it and go, oh, that's a really big book. How am I ever going to do this? I went, okay, well, there's a lot of people that use the software, so it can't be that hard, right? It could be intense. It could be big. It could be a lot. But if the parameters where I had a week to learn it, sounds like a week's the right amount of time, right? I'm just naive enough to take people at face value, I guess.
I love how you were describing this idea of of learning and asking questions and just realizing that if somebody else has done it, then they figured it out. I can figure that out. I think there's a level of self-assurance to that. Don't you think that's kind of where some of that is?
Yeah. And I think along those same lines, like, so one of the things I had to prepare myself for, right? So I went from doing a job that I'd done for 7 years. So I was at the pinnacle of my career, right? Everything was super easy, right? And so when I'm explaining it to other people what I do, they're like, "Oh, that sounds like so much," right? Which it was. But then coming to a new job, I had to remember, okay, I just left a job where my talent level, my ability level, the ease at which I did it was really, really high, right? Like it was just simple. But I'm coming into a new job that's completely different, and my talent level, my ease, and my ability to do it's gonna be super, super low.
Sure.
And I'm gonna have to relearn again. And so like having to recognize, like, don't get frustrated with the steps to education, right? Don't get frustrated in learning, because we're not born knowing anything, right? I've heard it said we're born with fear of two things. That's about all we're born with, is the fear of falling, the fear of loud noises. And beyond that, everything else is a learned behavior, right? You know that there are those parents that they could tell what their kid needs based on the baby's cry. They're like, oh, they need their diaper change. And I'm like, that was not me. There was like 5 things I knew my kids needed. Like they were like hungry, tired, wet. Some, like I forget what they are now, but like there was like a checklist of 5 that every time they cried, I'm like, okay, we're 3. We need 3. You know what I mean? It was like, that's because that's just, I knew that there was this checklist to do, and if I just went through this checklist, sometimes 2 or 3 times, that I'd get there. But in terms of learning, when I learned the software, when I moved into the internal IT role, so I had been at the tech support job for about 7.5, almost 8 years. I received an award for being like the best in the world that one in 2012, and I feel like I kind of like hit the pinnacle, right? It was like done all that I could do. So I went to a director. She was in turn of like internal services, and I was like, I want a job. I was like, I'm bored. Give me something else to do. And she's like, oh, well, this role is opening up. What do you know about this particular Microsoft product? I was like, I don't even know what it's called. Like she told me like the acronym. I'm like, I don't know what that stands for, but sounds like fun. And she's like, okay, do you think you can learn it? And I was like, did the person before learn it? Like let me add it. Like, give me the manual, give me the books, give me the wiki articles. Like, this was before like YouTube was. This was 2012, 2013, something like that. So like,
oh man, so YouTube wasn't this full of learning to do anything.
Right. It's a whole different story now. Kids have it easy these days. These kids. Just kidding. They have it harder in a lot of ways. But I was just, again, willing, like, I'll learn something. Give me the opportunity to learn and try it and see if it's something I want to be able to do. And so I had the guy, one of the people to help create this infrastructure, this digital infrastructure. He was like, I'll show you how to do it in 2 weeks. And I was like, let's do it. And then from there, a lot of it had to do with like, I got a real crash course in Excel and formulas and nesting formulas in Excel and creating pivot tables. Man, I can create you some fancy pivot tables if you want. But it was, I just assumed it was possible, and I tried it. And I'll never forget one of my second or third manager in tech support, the guy Dan Abney, great guy. I was trying to explain a problem to him at one point, and he's like, "Go search on the web." I'm like, "Wait," I'm like, "We are at the time like a $700 million a year company," and I was like, and this is for like a multi-million-dollar client. I was like, "You want me to just go Google search something?" And he goes, "Here's what you have to understand." He's like, within 30 minutes of you running into a problem, somebody else somewhere in the world has also run into that same exact problem, and they've documented the solution on the internet. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way whatsoever. Man, I'll tell you, it's true every time. I have yet to find a problem that someone else hasn't had before me and has a solution already out there for me on the internet. Like, it's crazy.
I noticed, and I wanted to make sure that I brought this into the conversation, because you mentioned the art of Googling as a needed skill. And as I read that, I was like, this is really good, because I think it's one thing to have a resource to look up information, but But especially now with AI and prompting AI to do certain things, you're literally having to think different, because a lot of times you can type something in the search string that I might put in to find the answer or the solution to a problem I have. I don't put the right words in there because the search results, I'm not clear on what I'm asking. I'm not I'm using my own jargon, not their jargon or whatever it is. So you have to get smarter. And I think the key to that skill from the curiosity is learning how to ask the right questions in the right way.
Right. Because we come with our assumptions and our biases, right? Like totally. We all have them. And so like, I mean, my kids are super guilty of this. And we're trying to help them through it. And they're like, I can't think of a question, but they'll be like, how's Tuesday? I'm sorry. What did you say? Yeah. How's Tuesday? I'm like, it's Friday. What are you talking about? Is it okay if I do my laundry on Tuesday? I'm like, oh, that is a completely different question with some context.
Right.
But that's how we treat Google. That's how we treat a lot of this AI stuff. Like I love these folks that are putting together all these prompts for people. I personally have not dabbled in AI just yet, but I'm hoping to get in there eventually because it looks fun. But the reality is, if you don't ask the right question with the right context, there was a gentleman the other night he prompted ChatGPT, hey, tell me about Billy Smith, whatever the person's name was, right? And ChatGPT brought back a couple paragraphs, but it was like this guy from California that was a singer-songwriter, not this local business owner.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, tell me about Billy Smith that owns such and such company in Exton, Pennsylvania. Boom. It came back with a page and a half of stuff on this guy because the context was more specific and you're able to do it, right? There's certain language that works in a Google search, works in the AI prompts that if you don't ask the right questions, you're going to get the wrong answer.
Right.
And so we have to be mindful of what paradigms we're bringing to the table when we're saying things we're just assuming people know, you know?
Well, I think that's, I run into this all the time, talk about it frequently. The number one thing that every company says on any type of survey is, they can be great in all these areas, but the one universally consistent thing that we're weakest in is communication. And it's not because we're not putting out tons of information. In fact, I think we're doing almost too much at times.
Yeah.
It's that it's not relevant to me, or I don't understand the relevance that it has to me. That's the gap. And every time that there's a communication gap, it will cause eventually a performance gap. And that's when we see it. Most people don't work backwards to figure out why there was this communication issue. They'll just say, well, we're going to throw communication under the bus, or we're going to just, try to address put a Band-Aid over the problem, instead of figuring out how did we get there? Like, what's causing that? What can we do better next time? And I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not like, it kind of goes back to the sales analogy, right? Are you just trying to get someone to give you money, or are you discovering what their process looks like and how you can help it?
Yeah.
Maybe you're not solving a problem, right? I genuinely think sales doesn't have to be solving a problem, but it's making your life better, right? If you've got a way of doing it better, faster, cheaper, tell me about it. Yeah. Listen, I could walk to work. I live 15 blocks from where I work now, right? I could walk to work. I could be very happy walking to work. I could be very healthy walking to work. Maybe I get rained on occasionally, but I'm getting to work, right? There's no problem. I get up at a certain time. I go home at a certain time. It all works. But if you're like, hey, check out this car, it'll get your work faster. I didn't have a problem, but now I've got a better method, right? And I think too often we think that we just need to solve everyone else's problems. And that's one thing I'm very guilty of, is where I have to, if I'm having a conversation with my wife, I have to say, is this a listening conversation or a solving conversation?
Sure.
Because I default to solving the problem, right? I just want to fix it, right? I want to fix everything. And so sometimes I have to slow myself down and say, do you just need me to listen? Because I can do that.
That's a great question.
I just need to know in advance that that's what you need me to do. So I'm
talking with Dan Koval, and we're in the middle of talking about 3 life lessons that he has figured out. And so our first was the work ethic conversation. A willingness to learn is where we just covered. And now we're going to talk about what it means. He wrote going the extra mile. And the thing that I picked up here in your post that I thought was really key, That's not my job, quote unquote, is an absolute cancer to an organization. Tell me about that.
Ooh, I get chills myself. If you have any organization, be it a sports team, be it a club, be it a company, be it a nonprofit, be it a board, whatever, the moment that people think that their their responsibility ends at a specific line in the sand is when you have isolation. And I believe we were created to be connected. I believe that when God created us, he intended for us to have not just connection with him, but with each other. And so
Sure.
when you have this attitude of isolation, it's impossible to thrive, right? Even something as simple as a plant. I doing landscaping, I was very big into horticulture. I know I'm way too nerdy about plants, but there are certain cells in a plant that do certain things, right? Just like in our bodies. And so the plant needs the chlorophyll in the leaves to attract the sunlight to generate energy so that the roots can grow to get nutrients, so that the xylem and phloem can move the nutrients in the water up and down to the petals and the stoma, so that the pollen can be created, so that the fruit grows. Like, it's this whole big cycle. But could you imagine if the roots were like, I'm not sucking up nutrients for you, flower. I'm saving them for me so I can grow deeper. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. But for some reason, we allow this in our companies where it's like, okay, your job is sales. So all you can do is sell people. You don't, once you make the sale, then you're done. You don't have to worry about anything else. Just make the sale. And it's like, no, your job is the relationship. Or in tech support, my job is to answer questions. I don't have to be nice to anybody. I'm solving their problems, so they should appreciate me anyway. You know, and so, and you hit that, right? There are plenty of people everywhere that just, that's not my job, comes up. And I never understood it because I didn't see my job as a job. I saw it, my responsibility is to do what I had to do to help, we call them users in the software world, help the user be successful, right? And whatever that looked like. Maybe I had to stay late that day. Maybe I had to send 3 extra emails. Maybe I had to go ask somebody else a question and bring them into the conversation. And I just felt like if I was the contact for you, if you finally got a hold of me and I'm the human being you found, then it's my responsibility to make sure that we got all your problems solved and you're satisfied when we end the conversation, whether it's 3 weeks from now because we've been working with the developers to rewrite the code to issue a patch, or it's we're talking about sales to get your account straightened out because there was a miscommunication and they thought you used too much.
Let me ask you a question, Dan. In your opinion, because I have my own thoughts on this too, but I'm just more curious about what your thoughts are on this. Sometimes I think when we, that's not my job. Okay, it's kind of like I've washed it off. It's not my issue. My hands are clean. They're free of this. Is that because of arrogance? Is it because of lack of care? Is it because of lack of commitment to the work? Is it maybe all of those? Is it something else? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it can be at both ends. I think it can be, I'm here from 9 to 5. This is what I do. I check these boxes. I process this paperwork, and that's what I'm paid for, right? Sure. It's very, very transactional approach.
And let me just assert something here. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a necessary thing.
Right. Oh, totally. Right. If there isn't a transaction, then something's awry, right? If you're not being paid for your efforts, there's a problem. Or if you're not producing effort, there's a problem. But I think, again, to think that you exist in this isolation is just wild. It's a wild perspective for me to try to understand. But I think part of it comes from at least the American burnout culture, right? And I think it's becoming more and more evident in that regard, and so I think it's becoming more and more prolific in the way that it shows itself. Is that I only have X number of hours in a day. I can only solve so many problems, so I'm gonna just push this off. But I've found, in my own experience, that when I do take that time to go the extra mile, to do the extra thing, to provide the extra help, kind of going back to the question that I used to get all the time of like, hey, I know this isn't your job, but can you point me in the right direction? Like, yeah, it's annoying to an extent to get that email once a week, but I've now just made a friend. I've now
Sure.
made an ally. I've now created a relationship and deepened a relationship where someone they're going to want to help me when I need it too. And I'm going to need help. I'm confident I'm going to need as much help as I can possibly get because I can't do everything on my own. And so I believe in the law of sowing and reaping, and so I'm willing to sow as much good stuff out there in hopes that I'm able to reap those benefits down the road. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I'd rather more people think that I'm a kind, loving, helpful person than not.
Well, Dan, let's as we kind of bring this together here. We started the conversation today talking about your previous career where you gave millions of dollars away over your career, and I'm assuming that's tens of millions of dollars. It's a big number.
Big number.
And big number. Yeah. And so now you have transitioned into a new role. I think there might be people that are wondering, why would you leave that role? Mm-hmm. You and I briefly spoke about that offline. Mm-hmm. I'd kind of like to go back to that because that was one of those moments where I was, man, I wish I hit record already. But what do you feel like was stirring in you?
So I was telling you, so I'd been in that role specifically for close to 7 years. It was somewhere around the pandemic timeframe, because some of the job stuff changed a little bit, right? Like travel wasn't an option. Like literally I was traveling international a couple of times a year before that, and I loved it. It was great. It was so much fun. The travel stopped, some of the interaction stopped, some of the direct impact stopped. And I started to like reevaluate, like, okay, what do I want to do? And so over those next couple of years, I did start to put some feelers out. I did apply for other roles, thinking, oh, this is the natural next progression for me. This is where I should go. This is what I should do. Here's what I can see. Here's my perspective. And man, if God didn't slam some doors in my face in the most like awful ways possible, like, I basically got ghosted for a position with so 9 times out of 10 they were organizations that I was already had a relationship with because of my job. Like I kind of knew I was going into the nonprofit world, and so I applied for the role, and I didn't know that I didn't make it any further in the process until the new hire reached out to introduce themselves, and I was like, "Ooh, golly, that hurts. That hurts a whole bunch." Like, talk about a sharp sword to your ego. Like that was bad. That was definitely a identity check moment for me of like, okay, where am I putting my faith and trust in? Am I trusting myself and my own understanding, or am I laying it before God and being like, okay, not my will but yours be done, sort of thing. And so I had earlier in 2023, I'd submitted a proposal to my then boss and was like, hey, here's what I see happening in this department. Here's what I see happening, and here's where I see the program's going and things developing and growing, and maybe a team coming around, and we having some more opportunities to kind of really like grow this outside of the US, because they did a lot of stuff around the globe, but there's more opportunities everywhere. And it was nope, not right now. That's not what we're doing. Can't do it. Not in the budget, right? And that kind of knocked the wind out of my sails. But in that process, I had reached out to another phenomenal contact on LinkedIn, Claire Davis. Whew, that is a phenomenal woman, and she's a really, really smart human being. She had helped me craft what I felt the job description would be for that next step up. So I was just like kind of a regular person, and I wanted to go to director level. And so her and I worked together. She helped me. And now most of her skills are in like the resume writing, but she was like, oh, I could totally help you with this. And I was like, great. So she did a really phenomenal thing where she asked me reach out to 6 or 7 of my main contacts that work with me and have them describe what assets I bring to the relationship. And then she used those to fill in the blanks of what some of the qualities and character assets of the person filling this role should look like. So she crafted this job description explicitly for me, which was, I was like, man, I feel pretty amazing. Thanks, Claire. Like you're awesome. You make me feel good about myself. And so, submitted that, and everything got kiboshed. So that was beginning of the year, February, March timeframe, whatever. And so when I went to turn in my resignation, my boss was like, "Oh my gosh, how are we ever going to I don't really, I don't know the intricacies of what you do. I'm not as familiar with all the programs you're running, this, that, the other thing." Because I had just moved under her only like 4 or 5 months prior. And I was like, "Well, hey, here's this great job description here. If you want to use this to try to fill the role." And darned if they didn't almost verbatim take what Claire wrote and put on the internet. Because I sent it to Claire. I was like, "Hey, Claire, check this out. Look what you did." Which is super cool because while I was there, as before God brought this opportunity to move into development in the nonprofit world, I had kind of reserved myself to nope, here's where I need to be. I need to be the best steward I can be for Bentley. I need to do the best job I can. I had started slacking off a little bit, full confession, and kind of riding the waves and just enjoying the freedoms and the luxuries that I was enjoying. And so I said, "That's not right. That's not God honoring. That's not being a good steward. Being a good steward of his resources he's blessed me with." And so I said, "Hey, I'm going to double down. I'm going to make a good effort." And it was around that time when things started really clicking that this opportunity came around, and I was like, "That doesn't make sense." But he just started opening doors and windows and made it very evident, despite terrifying, to leave what I knew for 16 years and go somewhere completely different. But I was just telling some of my coworkers this morning, I was like, it feels right. There was looking back, there was I definitely felt like I was being like the baby bird being pushed out of the nest. Okay, go fly now. You are old enough. We've given you enough. We've given you all we can. We've taught you all the things we can here in this nest, right? Now I just need to spread my wings and fly. It just feels very natural now.
So, well, Dan, as we wind it down here, one of the things I always like to do is people who are hearing you for the first time, they may want to contact you. They want to get to know you. Maybe just they want to share a story with you or pick your brain or whatever it might be. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'd totally welcome that. I mean, I've got some crazy stories, some great ones that and I'd love to hear other people's stories as well. If they have experience in the funding or the nonprofit world, I'm open to learning. LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. There's a couple of Dan Kovals out there, but I'm the only one making the world a better place. So, or so says my tagline. Self-proclaimed world changer.
There you go. I love it. Any closing thoughts as we wind this down? Any wisdom that you want to leave behind?
Yeah, I think if someone finds themselves in a position where they feel like they're getting too big, right? Too big of a fish in a small pond sort of thing, to take a minute and think about it. I think that because when the job description for this role was given to me, and I even shared it with my wife, I just forwarded it to her. I didn't say anything about it, right? Because people send me job options all the time because I know a lot of people.
Sure.
And my wife's response was, "This looks like you." And I said, "Oh, that's what I thought too." You never know who you're going to be until you start trying to find out who you are. Right.
Wonderful. Well, Dan, again, thank you for being on the episode today. This was a lot of fun for me. So many great nuggets, so many great little stories in there. And I kind of think I'd like to have you back on because you've mentioned a couple of times, I've got some pretty crazy, cool stories. Maybe we could just do a podcast on some of those cool stories sometimes. So thanks again for being here. Appreciate you very much. All right. We'll catch you all next time on the next episode of Confidence Covered by Humility.